All right, let's jump right into this. Today, we're unpacking an incredibly rich piece of historical and theological commentary on Surah Saba, authored by Maulana Maududi in his famous work, Tafhim ul-Quran. If you've ever wondered how ancient history, supernatural events, and classical theology all intersect to make one single, highly compelling argument, well, you're in exactly the right place.
Picture the scene. We are right in the heart of ancient Mecca, and the atmosphere is tense. The disbelievers of Mecca are openly mocking the Prophet Muhammad's message. They're being sarcastic, they're stubborn, and they're demanding hard proof. But instead of just firing back with abstract philosophy, the text reveals how the Quran delivers a massive reality check rooted entirely in historical precedent. It essentially says, you want proof? Let's look at the nations that came before you.
But before we get into the history, we really have to grasp what they were actually arguing about. The Meccans specifically rejected two foundational concepts: Tawheed, which is strict monotheism, and Akhirah, the concept of the hereafter and ultimate accountability. They just couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that a person's scattered dust could ever be resurrected and judged. And that disbelief, that is the engine driving all the arguments we're looking at today. Every historical example we're about to cover is custom-tailored to prove those two specific concepts.
So, to make sense of all this, we're going to take a quick trip through time. We'll start with the background of Surah Saba, then look at the immense blessings of David and Solomon, touch on the fascinating ruling on statues, debunk a famous myth about Solomon's death, check out the booming prosperity of ancient Saba, and finally wrap up with their absolute downfall.
Let's kick things off with part 1, the background of Surah Saba and the immediate Meccan context. What's really fascinating here is the timing. This was revealed during the early to middle Makkan period, which was a time of intense ideological friction. Like we mentioned, the Meccans weren't just disagreeing, they were actively making fun of the idea of life after death. In response, the overarching theme presented here is the stark contrast in how humanity reacts to divine blessings. Are we grateful, or do we let it go to our heads and become arrogant? Keep that question in mind, because it is the key to literally everything that follows.
Moving on to part 2, we hit the ultimate paradigm of gratitude, prophets David and Solomon.
Just think about the sheer scale of the miracles granted to Prophet David. We're not just talking about a guy who ran a successful, wealthy kingdom. We are talking about a fundamental shift in the laws of nature. Mountains and birds literally echoed his praise. The text also highlights a wild technological miracle, the softening of iron in his bare hands, which let him craft advanced armor. The man had immense, unbelievable power, yet he remained entirely devoted and grateful.
And that legacy of gratitude, it gets completely dialed up with his son, Solomon. The perks he was given were just staggering. He had control over the winds, drastically cutting down travel times for his forces. He was given springs of molten copper, which fueled a massive industrial boom. He even had complete command over the supernatural jinn, who did all this grueling labor and built monumental structures for him. But here's the kicker. Despite having literal command over the wind and the supernatural, which is arguably the most immense worldly power ever granted to anyone, Solomon remained a deeply humble servant. He never ever let that unmatched authority turn into arrogance.
This actually brings us to a really interesting detour in part 3, the ruling on statues and how Islamic jurisprudence shifted over time. The commentary breaks down a crucial theological detail here. It points out that under the Sharia, or divine law of Solomon's time, statues and imagery, known as tamathil, were actually totally fine. They were used as magnificent architectural decorations in his palaces. But fast forward to the Sharia of the Prophet Muhammad centuries later, and the image-making of living things becomes strictly off-limits.
Why the big change? Well, the author brings in a bunch of hadith to explain the rationale, and it essentially boils down to preserving pure monotheism. The goal wasn't just to ban art for no reason. History had shown that statues initially built for honor or decoration almost always evolved into objects of worship for later generations. So by closing the door to creating statues of living beings, later Islamic law proactively blocked the gradual creep of idol worship. It was a preventative measure that perfectly aligned with the core message of Tawheed.
Okay, getting back to the history in part 4, we're going to debunk a massive myth regarding Solomon's death and the jinn.
Honestly, this sequence plays out like a movie scene. Picture this. Solomon is standing there, leaning on his staff, supervising the heavy labor of the supernatural jinn. He quietly passes away right there, in that exact position. Because he's propped up by a staff, he still looks completely alive and watchful.
The jinn, who were terrified of his authority, just keep right on doing their grueling labor for a long time, totally unaware that he's dead. This goes on until termites slowly eat away at the wood of his staff. Finally, it snaps, causing his body to fall to the earth, revealing that he had passed away long ago. Now, why does this matter? Because this highly specific, almost poetic event was designed by divine will to completely shatter a massive superstition. People at the time, and honestly even way later, believed that the jinn possessed ilm al-ghaib, which is knowledge of the unseen or the future. This event is a practical, undeniable proof against that. If the jinn actually knew the unseen, there is absolutely no way they would have kept toiling in misery for a king who is already dead. It powerfully reasserts that absolute knowledge belongs solely to the divine.
Let's shift gears and geography for Part 5, the incredible prosperity of Saba, located in ancient Yemen.
The author paints this vivid picture of a civilization hitting absolute peak prosperity. The Sabaeans built the massive Marab Dam, which was an engineering marvel of the ancient world. It captured monsoon rains and channeled them into this highly advanced irrigation system. This created an era of unbelievable wealth, basically transforming the harsh mountainous terrain of Yemen into lush, continuous gardens that stretched out on the right and the left. They essentially built an earthly paradise, enjoying total safety and abundant food.
But here is where the story takes a massive U-turn from the legacy of David and Solomon. Instead of seeing all this as a divine gift, this crazy level of prosperity just bred pure arrogance. The commentary describes how they became entirely consumed by materialism. They got ungrateful. They openly rebelled against the very concept of accountability in the hereafter, and in their ultimate hubris, they even complained about their perfectly safe, continuous trade routes. They actually demanded isolation, just so they could hoard their wealth.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 6, Ingratitude, the Flood, and the Tragic Climax of the Sabaean Civilization.
Because they fundamentally failed the gratitude test, the consequences were devastating. And ironically, the very source of their massive wealth became the exact instrument of their destruction. The commentary details the flood of Aram, the catastrophic bursting of their great dam. Literally overnight, the lifeblood of their economy was violently washed away. Those beautiful, symmetrical gardens, destroyed, replaced by barren land, yielding nothing but bitter fruit and thorny bushes. Their unified kingdom completely shattered. The people were scattered, and they were reduced to nothing more than fragmented cautionary tales in the history books.
And this is what ties the whole explainer together, delivering a flawless response to those Meccan disbelievers. It masterfully juxtaposes two paths. On one side, you have the path of Solomon, immense power and supernatural blessings met with profound gratitude, resulting in divine favor. On the flip side, the path of Saba, massive prosperity and wealth met with arrogance and a flat-out denial of the hereafter, resulting in complete destruction. The point here is that wealth and power are never signs that you're intrinsically superior. They are simply a test. How the exact same test of abundance can either elevate you or completely destroy you depends entirely on your gratitude and your acknowledgement of a higher power. So, after walking through this intense, historical comparison laid out by Maulana Maudi, it really leaves us with a provocative question about our own lives right now. When we look at our modern conveniences, our wealth, our tech, our safety, do we see them as entitlements that we earned all on our own? Or do we recognize them as profound tests of our gratitude? Because the history of Saba is a pretty stark reminder that the dam can break at literally any moment. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. I hope this look into history and theology has sparked your curiosity and left you with something powerful to chew on today.